What's going on, guys? Top Tier Gaming here, and today I'm coming at you with the top 10 worst Yu-Gi-Oh cards of all time. I mean, these cards are completely unplayable, garbage. You might even shiver a little at the thought of their existence. They're really bad. They're not good at all. They have either zero interactions in the game, or they're actively trying to hurt your gameplay in 99% of all cases. So, before we get into the list, I want to shout out a few of our socials. I am building up the Discord community we have. Link down in the description to the Discord. We're doing like a deck doctor thing, and you can like post pictures and get help with decks if you want help with that. We also have a Twitter being run by Patty mostly, so you can check that out. He posts all the time. And yeah, so those are a couple of socials we're doing. But a big thing is 90% of you guys are not subscribed. 90% is a lot. Like, if you subtract 40 and then add 50, that would mean 100% of you guys are not subscribed. 100%? Really? 100% of you guys are not subscribed? How did we get here? How did we get here? A whole 100%? That's crazy. But yeah, with that aside, if you do like Yu-Gi-Oh content, or, you know, honestly, if you breathe air, feel free to subscribe because it would be greatly appreciated. So, if you want more Yu-Gi-Oh content in the future, hit that subscribe button, and let's get into the list. So first up on the list, we have Zone Eater. Now this card is absolutely terrible for something with such a menacing name. So essentially, if you don't know what Zone Eater does, when it's destroyed by battle, like in 5 turns, it will destroy the monster that battled it. So, you know, I don't want to take all these really old cards, put them in today's metagame, and be like, yeah, this old card doesn't do well in today's standards in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! But this card's never been good. And it has a card that's very similar. It's like a Swordsman from the Far East, something like that. But we're putting Zone Eater at number 10 and not that card, even though they're so similar, because Zone Eater just has 50 less defense. I don't know why. I don't even know why these things have a stat line, because it doesn't really matter. This card is awful. Like, even just thinking about it is awful. I don't know why it's printed. But yeah, that is number 10 on the list, Zone Eater. So yeah, we kicked off the list with something easy, something you might have seen on a bunch of top 10 worst cards list, because it really is just that bad of a card. But things are going to get much more spicy as we go down the list. So going with number 9, we have the Great Moth. Everyone knows this card is awful because it's just not reasonable. Summoning this card is not feasible at all. It's never going to happen. You just can't protect the cocoon long enough. This card is not only a brick with a huge, like, summoning requirement. How are you getting this card out? I have to know. I don't know how you're getting this card out. I don't think it's possible. I've never seen it done. In theory, it's got decent stats, but it doesn't even have an effect, really. It's like a vanilla monster that takes a billion turns to summon, and that, in general, I would consider to be one of the worst cards of all time. So, number 9 on the list, the Ultimate Great Moth. Ultimate Perfect Great Moth? I've forgotten its name, that's how bad it is. Alright, kicking off with number 8 on the list, we have Needle Ball. Now, this card is, I almost said relatively new, but this card's probably about a decade old now. Needle Ball. So this card came out in Storm of Ragnarok, and that's relatively new. It feels so weird to say when it's like a decade old, but actually the card is a lot older than that. It's one of those like OCG imports we got, I'm like 90% sure, and it's like really old. Essentially the card, you pay 2,000 life points to burn 1,000 points of damage. If you have taken a math course in your life, you can see the problem here. So yeah, in general, paying 2k to burn 1k is just a very bad effect, as it is hurting you more than it is hurting your opponent. I mean, most cards like Tremendous Fire end up hurting your opponent more than you, and you would play those over this card every single day of the week. Worst of all, this is a flip effect monster. Flip effect monsters usually have decent effects because in theory you have to wait a turn to flip them up. Needle Ball just has a not great effect, and it's a flip effect monster, so it's really just hitting all the high notes of what a terrible Yu-Gi-Oh card looks like. So that is why Needle Ball is number 8 on this list. Alright, number 7 on the list, we have the Immortal of Thunder. So essentially it's a flip effect monster, gain 3,000 life points. That's pretty good. When the card leaves the field, and I think it needs to go to graveyard specifically, take 5,000 points of damage. Again, this is another one of those big math problems. You gotta solve like the quadratic formula to figure this out, but generally you're just gonna take 2,000 points of damage. But Top Tier Gaming, what if you have Macrocosmos face up? You won't go to grave and you'll be fine. So this is a reasoning I heard in my last top 10 list I did a few years ago on the worst cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I mean, then it's like a 2-card combo flip effect monster, gain 3,000 points of damage. That is not very good. That is still very bad, even if you have a macro banish or dimensional fissure deck. This in general is just a very bad card. I'm pretty sure the effect to take 5,000 points of damage is actually separate from its flip effect. I think if like you set it and it gets dark hold, you just take 5,000 points of damage. I could be wrong. I'm not the Immortal of Thunder expert. In fact, I'm a Yu-Gi-Oh player, so I probably didn't even read this card. Yeah, but if not, still, like, to flip a monster that is generally going to just burn you 2k with a terrible stat line, I would consider this a terrible Yu-Gi-Oh card. Alright, heading on to number 6, we have Foolish Revival, our first trap card on the list. And I don't want to generally speak like trap cards in Yu-Gi-Oh are usually worse than other cards, at least in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! So we're just going to be basing this on a card. But traps do have the inherent effect that they take a turn to activate in most cases. So Foolish Revival, essentially you summon a monster to your opponent's side of the field. Now, actually in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, for some reason I think this card is better than it used to be, because you can like give them a monster and then make your plays, and they can't Cyframe Gear Gamma you, they can't infinite impermanence from hand, so like that's actually not completely terrible. The issue is it's a trap card, so you have to hope your opponent absolutely bricked and they did literally 0 plays before you can even use that sort of niche interaction this card has to stop certain hand traps. But in general, this card is a -2. You are giving your opponent a +1 as you take a -1. Did I say it's a +2? It's a -2 if I said it's a +2, because this card is very bad. So yeah, giving your opponent free monsters, never like good. So this card I think has always been designed to be bad. It must have some niche interaction in the game for Konami to have printed it, but this card's bad. Halfway down the list, we have number 5, and number 5 is going to be Unfortunate Report. This card is garbage. Essentially what this card says is your opponent gets to conduct their battle phase twice. So, I think we can all see why that's pretty bad. Essentially your opponent gets to attack you, and then they get to attack you again. So I think the idea with this card is that there are some niche interactions that exist with like strategies where you want to be attacked. The rank 1 Exceeses that are, I think they're called Crime and Punishment. They were Cain and Abel in the OCG, if you know what I'm talking about. I'll probably have pictures on the screen. But they actually get beneficial effects when they're attacked by your opponent. Things like, Daigustos Freeze. You know, you can make your opponent take a lot of extra damage. I think there's some weird, like, niche interactions with this card. But not only is this card probably outclassed by things like All Out Attack or some other older Yu-Gi-Oh cards, but this card is pretty ancient, so those strategies did not exist when this card was printed. So back then, I don't understand why this card was a card. It's just really bad. Alright, on to number 4 on the list, getting close to the top 3 here. We're going to kick it off with Cold Feet. Now, this is a pretty old card, also about a decade old. I remember reading this card when it came out, and I was absolutely flabbergasted that it said what it said. I thought that some environmental protection agencies were going to get Konami for even daring to use the paper to print this card. I mean, this card is hot trash. Like, in general, this card is nothing but a hindrance to you and does nothing really good at all. Maybe there's an interaction with Bait Doll. I'm not even quite sure if there's an interaction with Bait Doll. Essentially, this card says you cannot play spells or traps, so you're shutting yourself off from 2 mechanics in the game, being spells and traps, at a -1, which is very, very bad. But Top Tier Gaming, Mystical Ref Panel! You can activate Cold Feet and use Mystical Ref Panel, and then they actually can't activate spells and traps, which makes it a good card. It can't be on the top 10 worst cards. It has a use. So yeah, I don't want to really entertain the Mystical Ref Panel argument, because there's going to be a lot of cards on this list that you could Mystical Ref Panel, and that's like their one niche interaction in the game, is being able to take that effect and give it to your opponent, and it's a really bad effect. So in theory, you're using a card like Cold Feet becomes Cold Wave for just your opponent, right? If you have Mystical Ref Panel. There are two very big problems with this. One, it becomes a 2-card combo, and that means you're not only running Mystical Ref Panel, which is most of the time going to do nothing, and you're running Cold Feet, which most of the time is just going to be a -1 that makes you lose the game. And then you have to see both really terrible cards to have a decent effect. This is not feasible. It is what I would call trash. Yeah, Mystical Ref Panel is going to have an interaction with a lot of the top 3, if not all of the top 3, because they're really bad spell cards. So you could always say, hey, it has an interaction with Mystical Ref Panel. That does not make the card good. The card by itself in a vacuum has to be one of the worst cards ever printed in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Next up, to start off the top 3 worst cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is the Humble Sentry. This is a card that pretty much gives me nightmares when I go to bed at night. I think about activating the Humble Sentry at a big tournament and I lose. That's what this card does to me, because the card is really just that bad. So you guys may know the Forceful Sentry. It's a pretty old card. If you're an older player, you might know it, or if you've played more old formats. The Forceful Sentry is a card that has been banned for most of its existence. You get to take a card out of your opponent's hand. And the Humble Sentry is very similar. You get to take a card in your hand and put it back into your deck. This makes this card not only a -1, but a -2. So not only that, but to add insult to injury with the card, you actually have to reveal your entire hand. So you could say that there's actually an interaction with this card, being that you can put bricks back into your deck, which is like super cool. If I draw my Despot 001, I can put it back. Or really my Cult Wing, that would have been a better example. But yeah, no, that's not worth it at all. I'd rather just draw the brick, to be honest. The Humble Sentry in a vacuum might be the worst card on this list, but I think there's actually just 2 cards which are so awful it actually puts this card at number 3. But I think hopefully we can all see why the Humble Sentry is terrible. Do not bring up Mystical Ref Panel, because I will put the cooking pan back on. Alright, number 2 on this list, just one away from the worst card in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! In my opinion. We have number 2, Pot of Generosity. So the pot cards are generally known for being some of the most powerful spells in Yu-Gi-Oh! You have Pot of Greed, Pot of Duality, Pot of Extravagance. Most new is Pot of Prosperity, which is arguably like probably the best pot card, even maybe better than Pot of Greed. I doubt it. I take that back. I don't want to get rolled for that. But it is very, very good. But Pot of Generosity, if you thought the Humble Sentry was a good card, you're gonna love Pot of Generosity. So this card says you can take 2 cards from your hand and put them back into your deck. It's a -3. That's pretty good. That's very nice. I want to run this in my deck. So yeah, I think this one needs very little explanation. Pot of Generosity. I mean, again, Mystical Ref Panel, yes, I get it. It's, you know, honestly, it's pretty good with Mystical Ref Panel. But again, the card in a vacuum is very, very bad, and making it a 2-card combo with 2 very bad cards is even worse, potentially. So, yeah, this one leads to very little discussion because there's no argument for it to be good. It is hot trash. It is the lowest of the low, except for number 1. So at number 1, we have the card that I personally think is the worst card in the entire game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, this is one of those, like, we are actually wasting cardboard to print this card. It could be used to print any other card. It could be used to print Needle Ball. That would be better, because this card is very bad. So for the number 1 spot on this list, I have put Localized Tornado. It is a trap card that says you can shuffle all cards from your hand and graveyard into the deck. So if this was both players, it actually wouldn't be terrible. It's just like a reset button, which would be very annoying, and I still wouldn't like it as a card, but at least it would do something. This card, essentially, I think it's used so that you don't deck out, which, like, I get. Like, if you're already very low on resources and you're about to deck out, then hey, Localized Tornado, you can do it again. Maybe it can be used in some very degenerate mill decks that search for an FTK that have a bunch of draw cards. maybe, but no, because you put your hand back in the... This card has no use. I'm honestly searching for a use, and there's just not one. It doesn't exist. This card literally says up to minus 1 billion. You can't even run 1 billion cards in your deck, but that's how bad this card is. Like, you know, there's some just pride things you have to do, like when you're about to lose a game of chess, you're supposed to, you know, toss your king over, you know, there's things like that. If you localize Tornado yourself, you just have to leave your local game store. There's no answer. This card is, what's a good word to describe this card? Bad. I've used that card a lot, or I've used that word a lot in this video, but if there's any card that deserves the phrase bad, that's this one. This card is terrible. I'm sure down in the comments you guys will be able to put all the niche interactions this card has to prove me wrong and say that Localized Tornado is a top 10 best Yu-Gi-Oh card, because in my last top 10 video I had some people actually prove me wrong on cards I thought were bad that were actually not terrible. So if you want to leave your opinions down in the comments, tell me what you think the worst card in Yu-Gi-Oh is. If new cards come out and you're watching this video later, leave down in the comments to see if those cards can actually top the list as the worst Yu-Gi-Oh cards in the game. So I will be reading your comments down below. I am excited to read them. If you did enjoy this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. Again, 100% of you are not subscribed. That's a pretty high number. I know the number says 90, but remember we subtracted 40 and added 50, so it's actually 100% of you guys. So if you want to hit that subscribe button, I would greatly appreciate it. This was Top Tier Gaming. See you next time.